Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Edgell, and I'm here with Jonathan Quinn. And we're here to talk about, we're here to introduce you to ArcGIS Enterprise and building your first ArcGIS Enterprise deployment. So to get started, I'd like to see maybe a show of hands. How many of you are brand new to ArcGIS Enterprise? Awesome. It's like almost everybody. Great. Are any of you users of ArcGIS Online in the past? Okay, great, good proportion. And how about just ArcGIS Server? Did you use ArcGIS Server maybe in the past previously? Okay, awesome. So we hope that this session will help to deliver some new information and new ideas about ArcGIS Enterprise now. There might be some similarities with ArcGIS Online and some of the demos in the portal, but we'll kind of walk you through what we're doing here and sort of why we're doing them. So to start, I'm going to do a brief overview of just the Web GIS options that you get with Esri. That would be ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. Following that, we're going to do an overview of the ArcGIS Enterprise components. That is all the software pieces that make up ArcGIS Enterprise, as well as how they're configured together to form the base deployment. We'll go over the steps to build the base deployment, as well as some key concepts that are really good to know moving onwards. Then we're going to introduce the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder, which is a product designed to help make a lot of this easier for you. We're going to talk about the installation and configuration of the builder, and then we're going to talk about upgrading and using command line tools with it. And we're going to end with some quick tips for the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. So to start, Esri has two different Web GIS offerings. You've all probably heard of both of them, seems so. Those are ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. Now, ArcGIS Online is something that's offered as software as a service. It receives regular upgrades by Esri, and they happen automatically on the back end. So you can log in, and suddenly your ArcGIS Online is updated, if it's happened, the night before. With ArcGIS Enterprise, that is software that's installed in your own infrastructure. So your organization controls the monitoring and the maintenance of it, but also the upgrades. So when a new version of ArcGIS Enterprise comes out, it's up to you as the administrator or your IT to go ahead and upgrade it. Now, ArcGIS Enterprise can be installed on physical machines, on virtual machines, or in cloud environments such as Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services. For this presentation, we're focusing on ArcGIS Enterprise, not ArcGIS Online, and we'll be referring to the base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment. So moving on from that, I'll go over the components here. The base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment is 4 different software components. These were all available in previous releases, and now they're bundled together to form what we call ArcGIS Enterprise. You have the ArcGIS Web Adapter first. This is something that might be unfamiliar to those who have little experience with web servers. And if that is you and you have little experience, don't worry, because the Web Adapter is here to make this kind of as simple as possible for you. It's an Esri-built product that appropriately directs your network traffic, and it serves as a reverse proxy for your Web GIS access. It comes in 2 different versions, IIS for running in Microsoft IIS and Java for Java-based web servers. IIS version will automatically install any missing components that you don't have on your machine when you run the installer. But with the Java version, it does require an already installed Java-based web server that you've already installed that you're just going to configure with it. So if you're more savvy and you work with Java web servers, you can just use the Java-based web adapter. So following that is Portal for ArcGIS. Now this provides the web front end for your ArcGIS Enterprise experience, and it's probably going to be the most familiar to all of you who've worked with ArcGIS Online. It provides that infrastructure backend for the Web GIS, giving a content management system where users can create their own maps, applications, and web services. It can also be used to search for any content made available within the Web GIS, to use in their maps or apps, and you can also add services or content from outside of the organization. So services from other websites can be added in and then used within the portal in maps or applications. Up next is ArcGIS Server. So we consider this to be like the engine of the ArcGIS Enterprise. Previous users of ArcGIS Server are probably the most familiar with this as their way of working with Web GIS and putting their data online. We consider this like the engine, like I said. It lets you web enable your data. It supports a number of different service types, and it provides analytical capabilities. ArcGIS Server also has different licensing roles, such as image server, geoanalytics server, geoevent server. But for the base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment, we require the use of the GIS server. The GIS server is kind of the ArcGIS server that you may be more familiar with in your previous workflows. Last but not least is the ArcGIS Data Store. So this is an easy to install and use Esri managed data repository. It stores any spatial content that's being shared to Portal for ArcGIS. Now, the data store doesn't require a DBA. All of the administration is handled between ArcGIS Server and the data store itself. So that makes it a pretty easy option for organizations who want to provide feature service capabilities and self-service mapping to your users within the Web GIS. There are 3 different types of ArcGIS data stores. There's the relational, which stores hosted data, such as hosted feature layers, and it also stores the output from any spatial analysis tools that you run in your portal. There's also the tile cache data store. This is used to provide 3D mapping capabilities and to store scene services. And then lastly is the spatiotemporal data store, which is used for archiving real-time data that can be used with your federated geoevent server, but it also stores the results generated from your geoanalytics analysis tools. For the base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment, we require that the relational and the tile cache data store be utilized. These can both be configured on a single machine or spread out over multiple machines, whatever you prefer. And we also want to note to say that this is not actually a replacement to your enterprise geodatabase. Some of you out there might say, oh, we have SQL Server and we really like it and we use it for our data. You're still able to use your enterprise geodatabases with your ArcGIS Enterprise. The ArcGIS Data Store provides an option for hosted content if you want data out there that isn't necessarily residing in your enterprise geodatabases.
All right. So, to continue on that, Thomas described the 4 different components that make up ArcGIS Enterprise. There are relationships between all these components, and when you put them together, that again gives you your full base deployment. So as administrators, you should be aware that there are, each component has its own administrative endpoint, whether that's accessible through a browser or accessible through command line tools. Each of them have their own endpoints for administrative operations. The full platform, full ArcGIS Enterprise Base deployment is supported on both Windows and Linux. We're going to be going through Windows examples within this presentation, but everything does apply to a Linux with obvious differences of the operating system. And as he mentioned again, there's full support for AWS and Azure deployments. So before we get into using the Enterprise Builder, I just want to highlight what's involved with manually setting up a base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment. So after you've installed and authorized the software, the first step is to create the portal site. After you've done that, you create the ArcGIS server site. Then you register the ArcGIS data store, both relational and tile cache data stores with the server. Then you register the web adapters, one for portal and one for server. And then you federate ArcGIS server with portal. And then finally define a hosting server. So then you get your full base deployment. So after all these relationships are established, that's when you have your full deployment. There's a few key concepts that we want to highlight so that you're familiar with the terminology. The first is federation. So federation is the act of integrating the security of portal and server. And server is actually handing over security onto portal. So portal is going to manage the user store and access to any of the items. Any existing services available within the server are automatically added as items in the portal. And any new services that are published are also added automatically. The person that actually federates, the user that federates the server, that person is going to own all the existing services, but whoever is publishing any new services, the user publishing the services is going to own any services that they publish. The sharing model controls access to services. So by default, a service is shared with nobody, meaning only the owner of the service or the person that published the service can access the service. You can also share with a group or organization, and if you share it with a group, only members of the group can access the service. If you share it to the organization, anybody with a named user to the organization is able to access it. And lastly, you can share with everybody. This means that anybody that has access to the REST endpoint is able to reach the service. On the bottom right is the user interface, or UI, for federating. And it takes 4 different parameters. The first is the services URL. And this is the URL that you expect users and clients to use to reach any of the services. The administration URL is an internally used URL by Portal to run administrative operations on the server. And then lastly, provide credentials for an administrator within the server site. Next concept I want to go over is the hosting server. So the hosting server is a server that's going to host your content published directly to Portal. And this requires that it's registered, that the server side has a registered relational ArcGIS data store. And the act of setting it as a hosting server is, or actually this extends the functionality of your enterprise by offering the ability to run standard analysis and geoanalytics tools, offering the ability to publish any hosted layers. It's also required for batch geocoding or adding shapefiles or a CSV directly to a web map. And Thomas is going to go over that last piece of functionality in a little bit. The user interface for setting the hosting server is depicted in the screenshot. So once you have your federated server, there's a drop-down that's going to be populated with all the federated servers. And only the servers that have a registered relational ArcGIS data store are going to be selectable as the hosting server. So there's other key components to a base deployment that you should be aware of. The first is the install location. As I mentioned previously, there are command line tools that are available for any administrative operations, and these are going to reside within the install location of Portal Server and Data Store. And these will allow you to run security scans for Portal and Server, or change some of the database properties for the ArcGIS Data Store. The next component that's going to be important to be familiar with is the content directories and configuration store. This stores the data and data files and configuration files for Portal Server and Data Store. Next, there are 2 separate accounts that are used within a base enterprise deployment. The first is on the operating system level, and this is the service account. The service account is the one that's going to be used to run the processes for Portal Server and Data Store. And this account this could be a local account or domain account, and it's going to be the account that has to have read and write permissions to the install directory as well as the content and configuration stores. And then finally, there are administrative accounts. And these are accounts that are within the enterprise, and they're used to run any administrative operations within your deployment. So now we get to the enterprise builder. As I mentioned in a couple slides ago, there are a number of different steps that you have to go through to manually set up your base enterprise deployment. And this requires considerable knowledge about how the different pieces tie together, understanding what order to go through them. So new at 10.5.1, we've introduced the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder, which is designed to simplify the process of deploying a base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment by asking the minimum number of questions required to get you up and running. So there are some prerequisites that have to be met. You have to have HTTP and HTTPS bindings within your web server, at least 30 gigabytes of disk space, and sufficient resources to run all the components on a single machine. So within our demos, we're going to be using a machine called webgis.esri.com. And this is an example of some of the URLs that you're going to be using as administrators to work with the enterprise. For us, we're going to be focusing on the portal/home URL, which is going to be accessed through webgis.esri.com/portal/home. So the first thing I want to go through is a demo on installing the Enterprise Builder using installing ArcGIS Enterprise using the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. So when you have the builder available to you, it'll come as a disk image. And within the disk image, there's the builder application itself, as well as all the setup files that are required for portal, server, data store, and the web adapters. When you pull up the builder application, that'll guide you through the installation process of each of the components. So the first thing to do is to pass the welcome page. You accept the master license agreement. And then you define the destination folder for the install directory. This is again where all the software is going to be installed to. This is where you can find some of those command line tools. And here is where it checks to make sure that you have sufficient amount of disk space on the machine. Next, you define the ArcGIS Enterprise account. This is that operating system level account that's going to be used to run the software. This can be a domain account or a local account. I'm going to use a local account. New at 10.7 is the ability to define custom web adapter names. So I can use a default of portal or server, or I can use any custom names that I see fit for my organization. And this is new at 10.7. So next is it actually goes through, so next you provide the path to the authorization file. And if you guys have looked into the Enterprise Builder at 10.5.1 or through 10.6.1, you notice that the portal authorization file is missing. That's been added to the configuration stage. So next what it'll do is it'll go through and install the software. First it'll stage it, then it'll install portal, it'll install server, it'll install the ArcGIS data store, and then it'll install both web adapters. And this is a step here that'll actually enable the HTTP binding within IIS for you if you're working in a Windows environment. So once the install is done, it'll give you a summary indicating that all the components have been installed correctly. So the next step is to continue the deployment process by configuring the base deployment. And the ArcGIS Enterprise Configuration Wizard is going to guide you through this process. So once all the software has been installed, the first thing to do, you click Finish, and it brings up the ArcGIS Enterprise Configuration Wizard. Again, here is where you provide the path to the portal authorization file instead of specifying it within the install process. Browse to the portal JSON, the JSON license file downloaded from Esri, and click Next. And here is the administrative account, the initial administrative account that's going to be used to administer portal and server. And again, this is different than the operating system account. And here you provide the username, you provide the password, and then you confirm the password. And you also have to define the user license type, which is new at 10.7 based on the licensing changes. So you click Next, you define some additional account information for the initial administrator account, first name, last name, email, security question, and click Next. Then you define the root content directory, and this is where the configuration files and the content are going to reside within that parent folder of ArcGIS. And then you click Finish. First thing it's going to do is validate the environment. In this case, I didn't have the HTTPS binding set up. So go ahead and correct that, add the binding within IIS. Then it'll validate the environment. And the second step is to configure the portal. So it creates the portal site. Once it's done that, it'll create the GIS server site. Next step is to register the relational and ArcGIS data, relational and tile cache data stores with the ArcGIS server. And finally, the next step is to configure the web adapters, portal and server web adapters with portal and server. And then finally, federate the GIS server with portal, and then set the federated server as the hosting server. So these are all the steps that you normally would have done manually prior to 10.5.1. So the ArcGIS Enterprise Configuration Wizard is designed to really simplify that whole deployment process. I can click on the link to bring up the portal homepage, sign in with the initial administrator account, and then I can begin using the portal. So the next step is, what do you do next? So Thomas is going to go through the next steps for administrating your enterprise.
Thanks, John. Okay, so you've gone through the installation and everything is installed and configured, and you might be wondering, what do I do next to really get going with ArcGIS Enterprise? So we are going to cover a couple of these steps here. Firstly, we think that it's important to verify the deployment and make sure that you can publish some test data. Otherwise, something might be wrong that you might need to troubleshoot. Next up, we anticipate that you'll need to add members into your ArcGIS Enterprise. You might have a list of members that you need to work with, or maybe just one at a time. We have wizards or interfaces that can handle both. And then we're going to talk about customizing the homepage, branding your portal with a nice interface or a homepage, like a banner. Pardon our user conference image there, but we'll use Dev Summit ones in our demo. So you can also do other things like update the behavior of your portal, like utility services, or make a custom base map gallery. And you can also look at your ArcGIS Enterprise logs. I'll show you where you can configure the utility services in the base map gallery, but I won't really do a demo on those. And for information about the logs, we actually have a session coming up right after this where we talk about monitoring your ArcGIS Enterprise, and we also talk about the new user types, which John briefly touched on. So to start, I'm going to do these three things in a demo. So one moment, I have to actually Alt-Tab out of here and change our screen. Can everybody see my ArcGIS Enterprise settings page here? Is it going to thumbs up? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, so I'm here in ArcGIS Enterprise. It is being configured and it's out of the box. Now in John's demo, he did use a username called site admin, and that was the initial administrator account. That is it right there. We've just gone ahead and added me as well as an account today. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is verify and make sure that we can test some data. So over here on the map option is our map viewer. In the map viewer, you can see a map, and you can add data to the map, you can work with it, and you can do analysis, as well as save it and share it as apps or presentations. But let's go ahead and add some data. We're going to add a layer from our file. And I actually have a document on my desktop, which is a zipped shapefile of US states. So I'm going to go ahead and upload that, import that into my ArcGIS Enterprise. There we go. So it looks like everything is working. It took that CSV data and it dynamically delivered it to my map viewer. The smart mapping has activated so I can look at different attributes, and smart mapping will try to deliver a visualization that will make sense for what I'm looking at. So far, looks like that step is working well. You can definitely try and add other types of data if you want, but for this demo, we just did a zipped shapefile. So next up is looking at adding members. So if we go to the organization page again, we can see a list of how many members are in the organization. Right now we just have 2, like I showed you, but you can click on either add members here or in this members button. And this gives you a wizard to add members. Now, we don't have any enterprise logins right now, but you definitely have the option to add members for enterprise logins or existing enterprise user bases if you have those. We're just working with built-in right now. And you have the option here to either add a one-at-a-time member, or you might have a zipped or a bulk file of member lists. So we're going to try and demo that. We have a CSV that has some information here. So down here you see the required fields of what you need to have in your CSV. You need first name, last name, an email, a username, the role that person will take in your ArcGIS Enterprise, what user type, and what their password will be. They will be prompted to change the password as soon as they log in. So back on my desktop here, back on my desktop here, I have a CSV. Let's see if it'll open up. Oh, am I? Oh, thank you. Well, not. Can you see everything now? Okay, here we go. Okay. So I have a CSV file on my desktop called user list. And if we hit open, it'll verify and make sure that I have all of these required fields. Otherwise, it will actually give you an interface that lets you correct that. It says that I have 2 members, so if we hit next, you can actually see what we're adding. So I'm going to be adding John into our organization. I've configured him to be a creator user type with a role of a publisher, as well as Satish, who's going to be a viewer. with the role of a viewer. If I wanted to configure any of that, I can hit this pencil button, but that looks pretty good for now. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. At this point, I can configure licenses that can be assigned to that user. We're going to actually cover that in the next session after this, but you can do some other things like configure their settings. You can make it so that as soon as they join ArcGIS Enterprise, their profiles are going to be private. And when they log on to their portal, what's the first thing they're going to see? You might want them to see their content or maybe a map the first time they log in. So you have this kind of flexibility with customizing your member properties right from the get-go. I'm going to hit next. I get a summary, and then when I hit add members, I get a pop-up here saying I have 2 members added, and when I go to the member list, I can see Satish and John. If I wanted to make any corrections to anything, I can very easily change their roles by pressing this drop-down and choosing. As a viewer, Satish only has the option to be a viewer role, but as a creator, John has a lot more flexibility, as well as using custom roles. Next up, I'm going to do some customizing of the look and feel of your ArcGIS Enterprise. So here's the homepage of the out-of-the-box Enterprise. It's very vanilla and out-of-the-box looking, so you might want to make this look a little bit more dynamic and branded for your organization. In the organization settings, you hit this setting buttons here. Here you can see a list of a number of different things that you can configure for your ArcGIS Enterprise organization. Now, I have a logo that I'd like to use, so I'm going to click here and I'm going to use my logo. Enterprise logo. Press OK. Then also under the homepage option, I have the option to upload a background image. Use background. And a custom banner. So once you hit save, these should update. Now before I leave this page, I did mention utility services and whatnot. So over here we do have an option called utility services where you can configure a lot of the ways that your portal does certain tasks. For example, if you wanted to use a custom geometry service for geometry operations, you can use that. Right now it's using ArcGIS Online's utility tools. There's also the option to further customize for geo-enrichment, hydrology mapping, things like elevation, but also your directions and routing or geocoding services. Now, if you didn't have your own custom services and you wanted to hook into ArcGIS Online for those, that's very easy to do. We have an option here called ArcGIS Online, and all you have to do is check which of the utility services you want to use, provide your ArcGIS Online username and password, and then it will get connected and you'll be able to use those utility services through that username and password. As a disclaimer, any credits that are going to be spent using those utility services will go to that username that you've just configured there, so they'll be on the hook for all that. Okay, and also if you wanted to do Living Atlas in your portal, that's also something coming from ArcGIS Online, so you can click on one of these options and use your ArcGIS Online credentials there. So these are just some additional ways that you can further enhance the way that your ArcGIS Enterprise portal works. But I made those changes to the home page, so let's just see how they look. Haha. Oh, sorry. So you see there's this description text here. I'll just show you how to fix that one, but you can see the changed banner and background. So we do have a description option here, and this shows just some sample text. If you check this box to move it towards the bottom of the home page, that text that's hovering over will move. You can also do a lot of cool things with the description here. If you had some custom HTML, you could insert that there and really make your homepage more dynamic. I'll save this and just show you. If it loads. There we go. And everything looks a lot better now. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to our session. Pardon me. Can you see the slide now? Yeah, okay, good, thanks. So in our demo, we connected to the portal using the ArcGIS Enterprise portal website as an app. And this is going to be likely the main way that you as an administrator connects to your ArcGIS Enterprise. But you may also connect through a variety of other apps like ArcGIS Pro, maybe ArcGIS Maps for Office or Collector for ArcGIS. These apps will ask you for a URL to connect to your ArcGIS Enterprise. And so if you were to use something like our demo, that's the syntax you would use. You would just use the domain for your enterprise deployment. So in our case, webgis.esri.com / and then the web adapter for your ArcGIS Enterprise portal. So in that case, we're using portal. So you would do webgis.esri.com / portal. All
right. So now I'm going to cover upgrades and some of the command line tools available for the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. So, since we made it easier to deploy ArcGIS Enterprise starting at 10.5.1, we also want to make it easy to upgrade to any of the newer releases using the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. And to do that, we wanted to support a one-time click or one-click upgrade experience. And there's a quick screenshot. We're actually going to go through that in another demo. So when you have the let's say on this machine, I've got 10.5.1, 10.6, 10.6.1, whatever I have on this environment, and I'm ready to upgrade to 10.7. And the Enterprise Builder is going to look exactly the same when you're going through an upgrade. There's a builder application. You got the setup files, just as if you were installing it new. And when you bring up the application builder, click Next after the welcome page. You accept the master license agreement. This is an indication that you're going through an upgrade. The install location is going to be uneditable. Next, the Surface account is also going to pick up whatever you have configured on that environment. In this case, it's the same local account. Just provide the password. Here, the web adapters, because I'm coming from a version that didn't support custom names, just defaults portal and server. But in the future, moving forward from 10.7. This will honor any custom names that you have. Just like when you're installing new, the software authorization file for server only has to be provided here. Portal has been moved to kind of the actual continue upgrade operation. So when you're ready, you click install, and just like if you're installing new, I'm just going to skip through that real quick. Just goes ahead and uninstalls and reinstalls all the software for you. It'll give you a summary indicating that all the software has been upgraded correctly. This is likely going to take longer than installing fresh, just because it has to uninstall the previous version to install the new version. Once you hit finish, brings up the Enterprise Configuration Wizard to actually upgrade the environment. You provide the path to the license file for portal, and then it's a simple, again, one-click button to upgrade the enterprise. It validates the environment again, make sure HTTPS and HTTP are still accessible. Upgrade the portal, upgrade the GIS server site. Then it'll upgrade the ArcGIS data store. And then finally configure the web adapters again. So again, this is a very easy experience to go through in upgrading your environment. Once I click on that link to bring up the home page, I can sign in with the administrator account defined previously, or any administrator account, and continue to use the software in the enterprise at the newer version. Something you'll have to be aware of is that licenses have changed between previous versions and 10.7, and the next session is going to cover what that change is, and we also have an upgrade session that's going to go into that in much more detail. So I also want to cover some of the command line utilities. The first is to install, and the usage is providing the path to the builder executable. Then you provide the path to the install directory, the username and password for the account to run the software, and the server authorization wizard. Server authorization file. Two things omitted here, apologize, but the web adapters can be specified here as well. They're going to be updated within the install documentation for the Enterprise Builder, but it will be WA Portal and WA Services to specify the names of the web adapter within the silent install. Once the install is complete, when you're ready to configure, you'll use the configure base deployment batch file or shell script within the tools directory of the server install. And there are a number of different supported operations or options for the configuration page or configuration tool, very similar to going through the wizard. And here, the fourth to the last and third to the last options are the new options for 10.7 and providing the path to the authorization file, as well as whatever user type license ID for the initial administrator account. When you're ready to upgrade, the installation is the same. You provide the path to the builder executable, and then that information that's necessary to install, very similar to installing new. When you're ready to upgrade, you provide the path to the authorization file and the argument to define that it's a silent upgrade, and this will go through the upgrade process for you. So these tools are available if you want to easily, in a command line fashion or a batch script, a shell script, be able to easily deploy base ArcGIS, base enterprise deployment.
Great, thanks, John. So while we're wrapping up here, we also wanted to share some quick tips for the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. We talked about how it's really easy as an installer that you run once and it installs all of the different components for you. Because of that, we recommend that you do not kind of uninstall these components manually or reinstall the components manually. Doing that will kind of break the configuration or the internal logic that lets it understand that these are all working together as the builder. If you did want to uninstall the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder, if you go into your control panel and go to uninstall a program, you will see an entry there for ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. And by uninstalling that, you'll uninstall all of the components. So there's no need to really go and kind of uninstall Portal and then install it back again, because you'll get kind of a broken experience if you disrupt the initial configuration of the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. Next up is the upgrading. So if you had a previous ArcGIS Enterprise that you manually installed at maybe 10.5 and you wanted to upgrade to the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder, that's unfortunately not possible because the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder can only upgrade previous installations using the ArcGIS Enterprise Builder. So if you did a manual install and you wanted to upgrade, you would have to go through a manual upgrade process. And not the next session, but the session right after that is our upgrade session, and they're going to go over that and show you how it's actually not that scary. Thirdly is the patch notification tool. So we regularly release a number of great patches ranging from some crucial bug fixes or some security improvements. So we highly recommend that once you've finished installing using the builder, you find our patch notification tool. That will let you check for available patches and install them to your ArcGIS Enterprise and make sure that you're running kind of the most up-to-date build that we have. And lastly, John mentioned that there is the install directories that have command line tools. Now for ArcGIS Server and Portal for ArcGIS, we actually have 2 security scan tools. And when you run them, it will run through your server or your portal respectively, depending on which tool you run, and give you a bit of a report card for how your server or portal is doing in terms of security best practices. We have a documentation page as well, which talks about what those are. So if you wanted to know what it really searches for, you can find that. But it's a really handy tool to run if you wanted to kind of verify and see how your organization is doing in terms of security and best practices. So to wrap up, we also wanted to share some helpful resources. First off is definitely our help documentation. If you haven't taken a look at it recently, it's been much improved, and I really like it. It's a lot more easier to find information that you might be looking for. There's a topic called Tutorial, Set Up a Base ArcGIS Enterprise Deployment, which goes over quite a few of the things that we discussed here today and also shows you a bit more of a hands-on learning session for how to do that. There's other great sessions like licensing, which covers the new user type licensing. There's SSL certificates, if that's something that you weren't too sure about. Also upgrading and many, many more. Next up is tech support. We both really like tech support. They're here at the Dev Summit, so they're a great resource and a great great knowledge over there for people that can really get in and help troubleshoot through screen sharing sessions if you are having trouble at home with your ArcGIS Enterprise. So we highly recommend you take a look at the support.esri.com site and see if you can get tech support if you need it. Lastly is us. We're here in the ArcGIS Enterprise area in the showcase all this week, well, until Thursday. We're closed on Friday, the showcase. But if you have any questions about ArcGIS Enterprise, you're more than welcome to come and find us. We have lots of different areas for different components of ArcGIS Enterprise, whether that is portal or functionality like map services or feature services. We also wanted to give a little bit of a plug to our other sessions coming up. So right after this, we have a customization and administration session where we're going to kind of do the next steps beyond this session and do some further administration workflows and also show you how you can find your logs. Then we're going to have a session on extending ArcGIS Enterprise, which is really cool if you want to learn how to use things like server object extensions to give additional functionality to your GIS services. We've got 2 upgrading sessions, one this afternoon and then a repeat on Friday, which will be really great if you have those questions and want to know about upgrading. Webhooks are a new thing in 10.7, which are really cool. I think we showed them in the plenary, right? So if you want to learn more about that, we have a webhook session coming up on Wednesday. If you have SSL questions, we've got 2 ArcGIS Enterprise and SSL consideration sections. And the architecting your deployment one is really good if you have questions about how to scale your deployment or how to bring new ArcGIS server roles in. And then lastly, the road ahead is always a really cool session. That's one that actually isn't recorded and available on YouTube, so it's a good way to find out what's coming up next for ArcGIS Enterprise. We'd like to open the floor for questions now, but feel free to take the survey on our app and let us know what worked or didn't. This will help us make this better next year, hopefully not worse. And if you did have any questions and wanted to get access to slides, we have a QR code that you can scan here, and that will give you access to the slides we just presented. I'll leave that up, and if anybody has questions, let us know. Okay, we have one down there. So your question was about single machine deployments? Yeah.
So the question is this for a single machine deployment, right? Yeah, so the Enterprise Builder is designed for base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment all in the same machine. So it is for a single machine deployment. If you're interested in kind of different deployment options, we have sessions for Chef, PowerShell DSC, and obviously the showcase, we have a location for automating your deployments where they go through kind of multi-machine environments. So.
Do you have any questions? Yes, you, sir.
You mentioned that Azure, Azure, does that include Azure Cloud?
So the question is, we mentioned Azure, having support for Azure, and specifically Azure GovCloud. And I know that that's a good question for the Azure team or maybe our professional services, managed services team. I do believe that we have support for those specialized deployments in those specialized regions, but I don't want to give you any incorrect information. So come by the showcase and we can get you in touch with somebody who can answer that definitively. Yes.
First. The site was previously installed manually. Can we uninstall and upgrade using the builder?
That's a good question. So the question is, if you have, using the Enterprise Builder is a great way to run through upgrades, simplifies the process of getting to the latest version. The question was, if you had a base deployment you set up manually, can you uninstall manually, install the builder, and then go through an upgrade? I think so. I think that would work. But that's another great question for the upgrade team. I believe, because we do support uninstalling the software, installing it yourself, and then going through the upgrade. I don't see much different in what you're suggesting and that manual workflow. So I do think it would work. But again, stop by and we can get you in touch with the upgrade team. So.
Yeah, see you about there.
Good question. What's the difference between the authorization file and the license file? They're the same. It might just been old terminology that I'm using, but the authorization file is typically how, at least I've referred to the server authorization file, and they're the same thing. So sorry for the confusion, but they're just separate files to authorize the components, but in essence, they're both either the license file or the authorization file. So.
So yeah, like when you're running through the installer, you provide the authorization file for your server, and then when you're doing the later install, there's a portal licensing file that you would get from my Esri, and that used to be all in one, but now it's kind of separated. So yeah, licensing and authorizing portal is kind of bundled into one file now, when previously you'd have to authorize portal and then additionally add licenses. We cover that in more detail in the session right after this, though, if you had more questions. Yes?
Is it possible to import users from my ArcGIS Online organizational account?
That's a good question. The question is whether it's possible to import users from your ArcGIS Online organizational account. I think you can.
So they're different user stores. You know, you have your ArcGIS Online with named users there. Could be SAML, you could be using ADFS, you could be using built-in, but then, you know, you have this separate user store. And it's not so much importing, it's more so kind of transferring. So we do have, you know, once you kind of create those new users in your on-premises enterprise deployment, we have things like the Python API and sample scripts to be able to migrate all that content. So right now it's not so much that you can kind of take everything here, export it and import it. There is a bit of work to kind of make sure that you create the user, give it the correct role, and then run some sort of sample script to migrate all that content from your online organization to your on-premises portal.
I believe there's samples online for doing that with the REST, like with the API, the API for Python API.
Yep.
I would take a look at that, or maybe find those folks out from the showcases.
And the Python API can be used to transfer content between online organization to online organization, or on-premises portal to on-premises portal. So it doesn't really matter if you're going from online to portal, portal online, or any combination. So. Good question. So in environments that don't really have a domain, like AWS, Azure, I guess, you know, how do you go through that? And those are, yeah, a little bit trickier to deal with. You can define the enterprise builder kind of has one entry point. And typically what you're going to do is probably have something else that is going to direct traffic into your deployment, like a reverse proxy or load balancer or something like that, that's going to send the traffic into your deployment. The enterprise builder, I think, is a little bit more tricky. We do have some requests to get that functionality supported within the enterprise builder, and I think, you know, that it'd be important to do that. At this point in time, it doesn't support that, so I don't think that the enterprise, in those types of environments, the enterprise builder may not be the best choice. It could be something like CloudFormation for AWS or Cloud Builder, but you know, we can kind of take that conversation offline. So.
Yes, sir.
The ArcGIS data store, does it support utility server? Or do I need an enterprise?
So the question is whether the ArcGIS data store supports the utility services or utility
server.
Utility server. I'm not.
Yeah, I don't think either of us have much familiarity with it. I think so. What I am familiar with is that the utility server, kind of new generation of utility networks and that sort of thing, they're made for enterprise, right? They're made for ArcGIS Enterprise. So my answer is going to be yes, but you know, definitely kind of bring it over to those guys, and they can give you a better response there. So.
Yeah.
What version of Python do you use?
I'm sorry?
Python version 10.7.
Python version of 10.7, I mean, we do ship with 2 versions of it for kind of the, you know, how do I say it? But We do ship with two different versions. One for kind of the Pro type extended, functionalities that are coming out with Pro, but also the standard, 2.7 that has been shipped. I don't know the minor version. I know the major version is 2.7.
Yeah, I believe that's 2.7.
Yeah, 2.7. If you're interested in the minor version, we can kind of easily check on a deployment that we have. So.
Yeah, come by the island and we can take a look in the 10.7 builds there. Any other questions? No. All right.
Well, if you have any questions that come up after, if you go through a session, you have something that comes up, you have a question, again, we're here till Thursday afternoon, so feel free to come by and, we'll be there. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.